Right, so we're going to have a quick look now at Adobe Creative Cloud and just a few of the more common issues that come around preparing stuff for print when you're working in Creative Cloud. I get people in at all levels, so for some of you, some of the things I touch on here may be old school and you've been doing them for years, and equally there may be some that are completely new if you're new into the industry or if you come from a different background, there may be some areas that are new. We're going to have a chat about some of the more common issues. It won't cover everything. So some of the stuff we'll have a look at, colour management and setup, and where your best place is to do that. We'll have a little bit of a chat around some of the document settings and particularly putting a bleed on there for print. If you've been doing stuff for digital previously to go online and put on websites, you may never have even heard of that, so we'll just explain why that's there. The difference between colour modes, so RGB versus CMYK in particular, there's obviously other colour modes out there, but we'll focus on those two. And we'll have a chat about resolution. When you're going off to print, that's something you need to bear in mind, and we'll explain why and just clarify the difference between actual resolution and effective resolution, which you may have come across in packages like InDesign, and where that differs. And then we'll touch, hopefully with time allowing, on things like ink coverage, where you can see the ink coverage and warnings for kind of where you're going over the ink coverage limit and what that is, and working with fonts and whether you should outline your fonts or not, when to, when not to, and also pre-fighting and packaging at the end. So hopefully we'll have time to get through most, if not all of that. Colour management setup's the first one. I quite often come across people setting up the colour management settings individually. And when I say individually, what they're doing is they're going into Photoshop and they're setting up colour management in Photoshop. And then maybe they come out of that and go into InDesign and set up colour management settings in InDesign separately as well. And actually what they should really be doing is going into Adobe Bridge. And if you've ever used Bridge before, it's a really useful little tool for file management, and you can do a few things in there. You can create collections that are smart, that kind of thing. But one thing worth doing in there is going into the edit menu and setting your colour settings in Bridge rather than setting them individually in Photoshop and InDesign and Illustrator. If you set the colour management settings in Bridge, what you'll find is that actually synchronises it for you right across all the packages. So if you then bring an image in that you've edited in Photoshop, it's maybe got an embedded colour profile, and you drop it into your document that you're working on in InDesign, which may have been set up with a different set of colour settings. If you've done it in Bridge, they'll be synchronised, and you'll be working with one set of colour profiles right across the whole suite. So you won't have issues where colours are looking slightly different depending on what you've been working on them in. You're going to have that synchronised. By default, you'll find Creative Cloud quite often will default to the US settings as well, and the options that you'll be given in there will include some of these. So you won't be seeing the Japanese options, but you may be seeing the kind of North American options set by default, depending on the machine you're on. If they are, then set those to the UK settings. What you're looking for there is the Photograph 39, and you can see that in brackets down here. And you've got the option of General Purpose 3 or Pre-Press 3. Depending really on whether you're going out for digital print or lithographic print, you can pick the most relevant one in there. Again, I always encourage people to have a conversation with the printer as well. You know, I'm not a printer, I don't pretend to be a printer. My background is the Adobe tools and the design side of it, so I would always encourage you to have a chat with your printer. Just make sure that they're happy with the settings you're setting in there. It doesn't do any harm if you really are focused on getting print exactly right, then I would encourage you to do that. So that's where to go to set the colour management settings in there. The second issue on there was document settings and bleed in particular. So when you're working over in InDesign, if you're working for print as opposed to kind of digital work for going on a screen, then when you do your new document settings, you need to be having to think about the bleed setting. And the bleed setting is down here. Now, on the new version of the interface, if you're on some screens, like this one for example, it's hidden. It's tucked away down the bottom, or it may have been tucked away with a little arrow there. If you click that, you can expand it, and if you scroll down, you'll see the bleed settings are down here. Now, when you're going out to print, the printer will tell you what the bleed needs to be. Typically for A5, A4 size documents, you're probably working to about 3mm for the bleed. If you do anything that's being printed off in the States, they prefer a bigger bleed. They prefer usually to 5mm for that kind of letter size document. And if you're going off something much larger format, you know, it's a large kind of poster for a bus shelf or something like that, your bleed settings will no doubt be a lot higher as well. So that's where you'd set the bleed in there. When you create the new document, you'll then see the bleed line around the outside. So I just zoom in a little there. You can see the bleed line in red there and the edge of the paper in white. So that's the bleed. And if you're working with any colours or images on the page, what you should be doing, if they're going up towards the edge of the page, you should be taking them right up to the bleed. Now, if anybody's wondering, what is this bleed that he keeps talking about? What the bleed is for is when you print, you'll notice the colours go to the edge of the page there. If I have a bleed that runs over slightly, the idea is when that gets cropped off, there's no risk of having a little white line along the edge. What you're doing is you're allowing a little margin for error there, so if there's any slight movement in the cropping process, you've got that little margin for error there of 3mm, and it stops you suddenly having a kind of a slightly unsightly white line along the edge. So if the images are going, or colours are going up to the edge of the page, just run them over that little bit extra and it will solve that problem. You can check if there's any bleed issues when you do the pre-flighting at the end, and we'll show you that at the end, but you can actually get it to automatically check if anything comes within a certain distance of the edge of the page and isn't going right to the bleed. And if that happens, it will give you a warning and you can go away and fix that. So that's quite nice, and that's built into the pre-flighting. The next issue to be aware of is colour mode, RGB and CMYK in particular. When you go into print, you're generally going to be going off for a 4-colour print run in CMYK, so you're working with cyan, magenta, yellow and black. When you're working on a screen, whether it's this screen or the big screen or a mobile phone or a tablet or any kind of screen device, that's an RGB device. So you're actually designing on an RGB device something that's going out to print in CMYK. Now those two colour modes are actually opposites of each other. RGB is an additive colour mode, so it's made by adding together red, green and blue. So if you've got 100% RGB, it's white. When you're talking about CMYK, it's what's called a subtractive colour mode. So 100% CMYK is black. And they are literally opposites to each other. If you go on the colour slides in Photoshop, for example, from red right the way across, you'll get to cyan. And if you go on green all the way across, you'll get to magenta. So the problem people tend to have is switching between the two colour modes. The two colour gamuts for, well, more than two, but if you think of it as two colour gamuts for RGB and CMYK, they don't overlap perfectly. There's a lot of colours you can reproduce on a screen, on an RGB screen, that can't be output using a CMYK printer, and you'll have issues where there'll be a colour shift. Now, when you go into something like Photoshop and just pull up the colour picker here, you can see the range of colours roughly that can be produced using RGB, and there's quite a nice range of colours in there. You've got some real bright, vibrant greens, for example, here. But what you'll see next to this little triangle here, and if you hover the mouse over there, what it tells you is that that colour is out of gamut for print. Should tell you, there we go. Get a little warning saying it's out of gamut for print. What it's telling you is that colour won't print. It's saying in a nice way, you're going to get a surprise. When this comes back, that's not going to be the colour you think it is. Now, I don't know if anybody's ever had this problem before, but when you click on that, it'll give you a rough idea of what colour you will get back, and in this instance, it's a duller green. Up in the View menu here in Photoshop, you can go into Proof Setup, and you can choose Working CMYK. You can then turn on what's called the gamut warning, and that will show you in grey roughly all the colours in RGB that won't print in CMYK. It's giving you a rough warning of all those colours that are not going to output properly in CMYK. Anything in that grey area there is going to come out a different colour to the colour you're expecting. Now that might be a small shift. If you're pretty close to the edge anyway, the jump from there to there may not be that significant. You may not even notice it. But if you're right out in some of the colours that are kind of way out on the spectrum, you may find that jump is a lot bigger. If you're on these bright, vibrant greens, that's going to be quite a significant jump. And you're going to be a little bit depressed when you get your print run back and the colours are looking pretty dull down and pretty horrible. Now, there are ways around that. Obviously, the most obvious way around that would be spot colours. So using things like Pantone colours in there, for example. And you could, if you've got a spot colour in there, you could then start to create mixed inks and that kind of thing. But if you do that, you're no longer on a 4-colour print run. So just bear that in mind. Your cost of printing will go up, because I'm sure hundreds of guys next door can tell you. And it'll potentially take a little bit longer. And you might even find some of your local printers, if it's a small digital print shop, may not be able to handle them. They may not deal with spot colours. So you have got those things to bear in mind. That gamut warning, incidentally, you can also turn on with images. So if you open up an image and you want to know exactly where those problems are, let me just pull up an example here. Something like these tomatoes. That's a pretty extreme example, actually, because I think you'll find most of that's probably outside the CMYK gamut. But if I turn on the gamut warning there, yeah, it is. You can see everything that's grey on that image isn't going to output properly for print. There's going to be some kind of colour shift, be it a large one or a small one. Now, if you want to preview that colour shift, you can, instead of turning on the gamut warning, go into here and turn on Proof Colours. And what that's actually doing is it's giving you a screen proof, if you like, of your CMYK. So you can see it's an RGB image, but it's proofing it in CMYK there. So it's kind of giving you a screen proof of how that's going to look. And you can toggle that on and off just here using Ctrl-Y. What you can also do is simulate at the same time how this might look to somebody who's colourblind, which can be an interesting one. So if I turn that on, that's how somebody colourblind will see the image. So it gives you a rough simulation. Now, that's quite handy when you're doing accessibility preparations and you may be dropping some text on top of the image, and you suddenly go in there and preview how somebody colourblind sees it, and you realise they can't read the text because you've picked a colour that's almost the same. So that can be quite handy for kind of proofing for accessibility. So while we're in there, just worth mentioning that option is in there as well. So that's colour modes, RGB, CMYK. So just bear in mind they are opposite colour modes. With the best will in the world, you are designing on an RGB screen device, something that's going out to CMYK print, so just allow for that. You're never going to get a perfect screen reproduction of how it looks in print. If you've got a good monitor, it's well calibrated, you'll probably find it's pretty accurate. But if it's an important print run and colour's a key thing for you, I would always recommend doing a test print first and just seeing how it looks. Because relying on a screen device for something that's going out to a 4-colour run, it's never going to be absolutely perfect. The next issue on there would be resolution. So I don't know if has anybody had issues with resolution in print? Anything ever come back looking a little bit ropey? It can happen, it's quite a common one. What you tend to find is people will go out and they'll realise they'll generally understand that for print they need a certain resolution. So if you're looking at kind of an A4 print run, you're probably going to be asked for stuff to be 300 dpi, is usually the standard for that kind of size. And they ask for the image that they want to use, and somebody sends the image over and says, yep, there's the image, it's 300 dpi. And that's great, because what they do is they take that image and they're working over in InDesign, and they drop it onto the page. So they go to File and Place, and they grab the image that they want to use. It doesn't matter which image it is. Let me just pull one in here. We'll use that. Smart as one. And they drop it onto the page, and they think, great, I've used a 300 dpi image. What they haven't considered is when they were dropping it onto the page, they've effectively resized it and put it where they wanted. And in the process of resizing the image, what you will find is that the resolution has changed. Now, when I say it's changed, you can see the actual PPI there and the effective PPI. And the two are different. The actual PPI, you might not be able to read it from that again, the actual PPI is 72 pixels per inch, the effective is 949. So in there, I'm using a 72 dpi image that's going to be fine for print, because I've resized it down to such a size that I've actually got 949 pixels per inch now. But that can work the other way. Somebody might have given you an image that's 300 dpi, sized it kind of 2 inch by 1 inch, and you've then resized it to go on the front cover. And if you've done that in that process, what you're doing is you're actually changing the resolution of the image effectively. So it's no longer going to display as 300 dpi. You are going to have issues when you go out to print. So you do need to be aware of that effective resolution there. Your effective resolution, really, you need to be aiming for 300 dpi for printer kind of A4 size. If you go into larger format stuff, then you can obviously drop the resolution down slightly, because if you think about what you're using it for, if you're sitting there holding that at this distance, 300 dpi, if you start going too much less than that, it becomes obvious. But if we're talking about a sign that's going up on the first floor window and you can only have a look at it from across the street, your eyes are going to have to be a lot better than mine, because I certainly wouldn't pick out that level of detail from that distance. So you can probably drop it down significantly lower at that point. The print will be able to advise on what level you can bring that down to. So just be aware in this links panel here, you can check the actual PPI and the effective PPI, and just make sure your effective PPI is kind of at least at the minimum that you need for that kind of print. When you're in there, one other good thing just to watch out for as well on a kind of related note is make sure you haven't got any broken links in there. I've seen that happen before. People have a broken link there, don't realise it, output the document. When you've got a broken link in InDesign, it'll show up there, you'll see a little symbol for it. The image will still show on the screen. You won't necessarily realise there's a broken link there. And I often see people look at that, they haven't even got the links panel open, they output the document for print, and what it's doing is it's not using the original image. It can't find it because the link's broken. So what it does is it uses effectively a real low resolution, you might almost call it a thumbnail, just to put that image in there. So you could easily be using a 72 dpi version of your really high-res image simply because the link's broken. So just make sure you haven't got any broken links showing up in here. If you have, relink them, make sure it can find the original link file. and then you'll stop that problem from happening before it becomes a problem, shall we say. So that's dropping your images in there and your links. Again, that can be checked for in the preflighting, so you can have your preflighting checked for broken links and also check for resolution issues in there as well. In terms of ink coverage, when you're looking at ink coverage, what you can do is you can, in InDesign, a lot of people don't realise this, but go into the window menu and go down to output, and you have a separations preview panel down here. If you just drag this one off. Now, many people, particularly in kind of the design departments, won't even hit this really until the printer throws it back and send a document off, and the printer will throw it back and say your ink levels are too high. When you're printing on a 4-colour print run, you can effectively print 400% ink. If you think about it, you've got cyan, magenta, yellow and black, so you've got 4 inks, and if you print 100% of each, that's 400%. Now, I don't know if anybody's ever tried printing on even just your home inkjet printer when you use an image that's got a lot of colour in it, and the paper ends up coming out looking a bit wet and the inks have started to go through and it becomes a bit of a mess. Well, on a commercial scale, it's a similar kind of problem, but on a more commercial scale, but it's a similar problem really. So if your ink levels are too high, what you'll find is that it causes issues for the printer. And depending on the stock of material they're printing on, stock of paper they're printing on, they'll have an ink level that they would like you to try and work within. It might be as low as kind of 230, 240%, might go up as high as 350%, depending on the kind of papers and materials they're working with. But they will have a level, and if you go too much above that, you potentially will have problems. So what you can do is you can go into this separations preview panel. Let me just make this image a little bit bigger so we can see this a bit clearer. And in there, under view, you can turn on your ink limit, and you can set the percentage level there that you want the warning for. So I want this to warn me if anything goes above 250%, for example. And it's now giving me a little red warning anywhere on here where the ink levels are going above 250%. So it lets me just get a gut feel of whether this is going to be a major problem with this document or not. I've only got one image on there, but I can get a bit of a feel as to whether I'm going to have a major problem. Now the printer may well, in many cases, be able to compensate that for you and correct it for you and deal with it, and they'll have software that'll do that. But at least you get a feel in there as to whether that's something you need to be majorly concerned about or not. You may find it's one little bit at one corner of the image and it's only over by 10 or 15%. It may not cause a problem, but you may also find you have an image in there where it's kind of over by 100% for most of the image. That's obviously a bigger problem that you need to be spending a bit of time thinking about. So that's the separations preview. Sorry, yes.
So how do you change that then if you think you've got a problem?
Yeah, it would depend on where the problem is and what the problem is. I mean, the printer can quite often do it for you anyway, reduce ink levels. I mean, the other option is to go over and to take the image into something like Photoshop, and you could do some edits in there with the colour balance, for example, would be one way of doing it, using the adjustments panel in there where you can do a non-destructive adjustment and use something like the colour balance tool to do that. Yeah. So that's the other option. So the last one in there, working with fonts. I often get asked, shouldn't you outline all your fonts before you send it off to the printer? Outlining fonts, for anybody who's not maybe come across it before, is a process whereby you basically convert your fonts into paths that effectively turn into vectors. So it's quite a common process when people are working in something like Illustrator. Let's dive into an example here. So if people are working in something like Illustrator, quite often they'll use the type tool, put some text in there, and at the end they'll want to outline the fonts. It effectively turns them into paths. So when you hand it off to the printer, you don't have issues where the printer's missing the font and things haven't come through because they haven't got that font, for example. Now, if you're working in InDesign, that's a little different, because when you output, for starters, it's going to embed the fonts in the PDF anyway, so you're unlikely to have problems. But I think the other thing to be aware of is certain features that you use in InDesign, when you outline and create outlines from there, you potentially lose them. So this is some text here that's got an underscore on there, and I've got another one here with a strike through there. If I was to select all of that and actually turn that into outlines by going to the type menu and create outlines, what you'll see is you have a problem now because the underscore's gone and the strike through's gone. So I've effectively just lost those features completely simply because I've created outlines for it rather than simply sending it through as a font. Now if I'd left it as a font, the underscore would still be there, the strike through would still be there. But because I've gone and created outlines, they're gone. So I've lost them in that process. So if you're working in InDesign, I would probably recommend in majority of cases not creating outlines. Just rely on the fact that it's going to embed the font into the PDF. The printer will be able to work with that, and you will keep your underscores, your strike throughs, that kind of thing will still be in there, rather than risking it messing up the document. If you're doing something more like a simple kind of design over in Illustrator, then there may well be cases where you'd want to create outlines and adjust it. So that would be a different scenario. So how you can check for most of this stuff in InDesign would be through a process called Preflighting. And the Preflighting panel actually is live while you're working in InDesign. They turned it into live Preflighting some years back. And where you find it is actually down the bottom of the page. It's just down here. And it tells you the number of errors in the document. And when you go down into there, you can click on that little 2 errors in my case there, and it brings up the pre-flight panel. And you can switch to other profiles in there. So I've switched over to a different profile I created earlier here. And if you drill into these, you can see exactly what the errors are. So in this case, it's brought up some errors around image resolution. There's a bleed trim hazard there, it's got some overset text, and there's some style issues there as well. And when you expand those, it tells you exactly what they are. So in this case, click on the photo, it tells me the problem, effective resolution 220 ppi, and in my pre-flighting I've told it not to allow images below 300 dpi, for example. So it's going to pick up on that problem and tell me there's an issue. I can click the page number and it takes me straight to the exact image where the problem is. So I can always go into my links panel and check what the problem is. Now, effective resolution of 220, it's a bit of an issue, is that I wanted to aim for 300. If it was 290, I wouldn't care, but 220 is quite a big jump there, so I may want to get a higher resolution version of the image or swap it out for a different image and fix it somehow. If I go in here to the bleed trim hazard and click on the page number again, it jumps me to the problem, and you can see the problem with this image. I've taken it up to the edge of the page, I've not taken it right up to the bleed line. So I can go in there, bring it out so it's past the bleed line, and you'll see the minute you do that, the issue disappears. That bleed trim hazard has gone completely, because it's live pre-flighting, so this is updating as you're fixing these problems. Again, got overset text. If I went in there and jumped to that text, you can see the little red marker there for overset text, which shows on the text frame. Go in there, and this, in this instance, I'll just delete it. Normally I'd probably want to read it first and check what it is, but we don't need to worry about that here, so I'll just delete it. Again, that issue has gone, and I've only got 1 error for overset text. With pre-flighting, you don't have to fix everything. It's your choice. It's a warning list. It's a checklist. It's not a case of you can't output the document and you fix it. You can fix the ones you want and you can ignore the ones you want and then output the document when you're happy or ready. But it gives you a checklist of things to go through and make sure you haven't made any really major mess-ups in there, shall we say, and fix those before you output the document and send it to the printer. And hopefully that way you give the printer a bit of an easier life. Because in a lot of cases the printer has this dropped on them and they end up trying to fix all these problems for people. But at least this way you can kind of preempt some of that and fix some of these problems. You can create your own pre-flight profiles. So if you go into the flyout menu on pre-flighting and go into define profiles, then in there you can create your own. So you can click the little plus down here and we can do one called Print Show. And you can go up and down in here and set the settings you want. Now there's loads in there. You can see, you can check for things like missing links, for example. If you go down a little bit, you can allow certain colour plates or not. You can tell it to look for spot colours and tell it what the maximum number of spot colours is that you want to allow. You have image resolution settings, so you might decide to set your minimum colour image resolution there to 250 or 300, depending on what you're doing. Non-proportional scaling. You just forgot to hold down Ctrl-Shift when you're scaling something. You stretched it back, or rather, you hold down Shift. You can check for overrides animation, interactive elements like video and animation. Video doesn't print very well for obvious reasons. So you might want to check your document if there's any video in there. You can swap it out for an image that looks more appropriate. So you can have all of that kind of stuff picked up in the pre-flighting. There's your bleed trim hazard. So in this instance, it's checking. And if any images come within 6.35mm of the edge of the page, they go within that last bit but don't bleed properly, it flags it up as an error for me. You can also, I should add, load in pre-flighting profiles. So if I click here, I can load a profile or export a profile. So if you have a printer who's really familiar with InDesign and uses it for their own pre-flighting, you can potentially just go load a profile that they've given you. Or if somebody else in the company's already created one of their own, you can just load theirs in and use that. So you don't necessarily have to build all this stuff from scratch. You can load one in somebody's given you. So pre-flighting is a great way to kind of fix a lot of these problems, and you can have multiple pre-flighting profiles. So you might have, 2 or 3. You might have one for your digital documents, one for your print documents, etc. Just run them against the right profile, fix the obvious errors, ignore any that you're not particularly worried about, and then you can send it off to your printer, and hopefully you'll get a little bit less kind of grief from the printer at the end when you package it all up and send it off, or when you output the whole thing at the end, for example, to a print-ready PDF or something like that. Any questions?
I was going to ask you one actually, because I had this problem producing banners and things where they're asking for outlines.
Right.
Which is fine, and I came across exactly actually the same thing you were saying. There was in a cell or in InDesign,
Yeah.
I'd put a box, the text was white out of the colour.
Right, yeah.
You'd put it to path, the box completely
Yeah,
goes.
yeah.
As you say. Now, is it a fact that really they should be able to work without having to convert it to path if it's straight from InDesign?
Yeah, I mean...
And my other question actually was, when you take it to path, even though it says 0 on the outline, does
Yeah.
it give fraction more on that weight of the font? Because I've
Haven't come
noticed
across
that.
that issue. I mean, in terms of should they be able to handle it as fonts, my personal thoughts on that are yes, in most cases they should. I mean, the PDF will contain the embedded font file, and there's no major reasons that I'm aware of that most printers wouldn't be able to deal with that and handle it. So it's not something I've had an issue with. I've used numerous different printers. I've
So
never
when
had
a printer
anybody-
asks for all paths to outline,
yeah,
it should be able to...
It's often a habit because they're not
Yeah,
used to
yeah.
getting it. I mean, I've not come across an issue where somebody's had a problem with that, and I tend to just do mine as a print-ready PDF.
Yeah.
If I'm in Illustrator, it's a bit different. I will tend to put it to outlines in there, usually because it's more of a drawing and you maybe want to adjust the font along with the rest of the drawing. But in InDesign, I've always found it's worked absolutely fine just outputting it to a print-ready PDF. As long as you do output it to a print-ready PDF.
So you do that yourself. You don't send InDesign files to the printer. You create the PDF.
Yeah, these days I've tended to just output it as a print-ready PDF myself and send a PDF, and I've not had any issues. I used to, well, many years ago, I used to use Quark and Collect for output, and then more recently InDesign and package it. And if a printer asks for the package, that's fine. I don't have a problem sending that. But most printers I've had have been quite happy to take the print-ready PDF.
So as a default on Adobe, you have the PDF X1A.
Exactly,
Is
yeah.
that the one to use?
So yeah, in the PDF presets here, what I would tend to use personally, I tend to go down here and I'd use the press quality. So the split on these really is high quality print is aimed more for your office, laser jets and that kind of thing. Press quality is aimed for kind of lithographic quality. And when you've done your document at the beginning, if you set your document intent to print at the beginning, if you output it as press quality, what it should also do is it should convert any RGB images that are in there into CMYK using whatever colour profiles you've set up in there. So yeah, set your intent to print and at the end go for press quality. If you have any issues with press quality, you could try the PDF X4 as well, which is very simple.
No, I was always used to use for high quality print the 1A, is that?
I would go for press quality.
Oh, okay, fine.
The one is the older standard, so I mean,
Fine,
if
yeah.
it's from 2001. I mean, PDF X4 and press quality are quite similar.
Yeah.
So you won't have issues around things like transparency and stuff like that. You'll find with PDF X4 and the press quality one, it'll handle the transparency stuff a bit better.
I have a final question, sorry.
Yeah.
It was just on when you were saying about ink coverage and everything.
Yeah.
More often than not, I send things to print and I just leave the black as it is. Now, in recent cases, they've asked for a black including 50 cyan, 50 magenta, 50 yellow,
Right, yeah.
which I mix up myself.
Yeah.
Two questions really. Why don't they have that as a default on
Yeah,
each
you've
side?
got the-
And then also,
Well, you've got two in here. You've got in the swatches, you've got what people will often say to me is there's two blacks. Why? Well, registration actually isn't black. Registration is 100% on every plate. So registration is 100% cyan, 100% magenta, 100% yellow, 100% black. So it gets used by default for things like the crop marks, the bleed marks, that kind of thing, as opposed to the black down here. So you go into the black there, and at the moment it's set by default to 100% K. Now, that won't necessarily give you the richest black. You will probably want some extra colours in there. You've probably seen the stuff on the news over the last 12 months about the Vanta, what's it called, Vanta black, the really dark black, that the blackest black ever apparently. And black isn't just necessarily black, it is kind of different colours mixed in there when you think of a black. So I would tend to go in there, check with the printer what they want on the black, and you can set that within there and change it. Any of these swatches can be changed, not just the blacks. I mean, even the paper swatch. If you're designing something and you know it's going to be printed on a particular colour of paper, don't go put big coloured frames behind everything. Just double click paper and change it in there. And you can go in there and change it, and that changes your paper colour. Now, when you do it in there, the beauty of that is it won't print that colour. You're simulating paper. So, whereas if you put great big coloured frames behind everything, of course it's going to print those frames unless you remember to remove them. But by just changing the paper colour in there, that's now just simulated a new paper colour. So any of these swatches can be changed. I can put it back to white again. So similarly with the black, if somebody asks you and wants particular settings on the black, it's very, very easy to just go in there, double click on it, and you can change those, bring it up.